Ladies and gentlemen, our program is about to begin. We would like to ask you to please take your seats and ensure that all electronic devices have been turned to off or silent. Thank you for your cooperation. Our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome once again your MC, Kadest Tesfagiorgis.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our final day, day 3, our closing plenary. I hope your scientific meetings went well. I hope you were able to attend the parallel roundtable sessions. And I hope you had good conversations and met new people and connected with friends. Today we conclude our annual meeting and turn our attention to doing the work we've been talking about for the past 3 days, and hopefully with a renewed sense of optimism. To help with that, we have an inspiring lineup of speakers this afternoon, beginning with the Honorable Mark Green, Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. But first, I would like to welcome Harry Bader, Acting Executive Director of the U.S. Global Development Lab at USAID, to stage to begin our afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is a profound honor to introduce the 18th Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, Administrator Mark Green. He has lived a life dedicated to public service. Mark has been a congressman for the state of Wisconsin, a U.S. ambassador to Tanzania, and the president of the International Republican Institute. Administrator Green's commitment to innovation and the grand challenge model stems precisely from his conviction that international assistance must be designed to build the capacity of others so that they can chart their own futures. So grand challenges, regardless of donor, must be truly democratic and therefore open to all, so that the intellect, the creativity of every person, of every nation, can be drawn upon to help solve the seemingly inconquerable impediments to the improvement of the human condition. With this challenge, it is a great pleasure, as we celebrate the proven record of grand challenges, I ask you to join me in welcoming the USAID Administrator, Mark Green. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Harry. Thank you. Thank you, Harry, for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here with so many distinguished guests. I know you'll be hearing shortly from Secretary Tillerson. I want to thank him publicly for his great support of both USAID and Global Innovation Week. Thanks to our partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I understand that Bill Gates is here right now. We are deeply appreciative for the Foundation's support for the work we do and, of course, for the Grand Challenges annual meeting. The vision and the generosity of the Gates Foundation really is inspiring and truly life-saving. So let me begin with a story. In 1988, my wife and I taught secondary school in a little village in Kenya. Now, that little village in those days had but one telephone, and it was a wind-up telephone attached to a wooden box in the main office of the school. If you wanted to make a long-distance call, you literally went there and turned the crank, picked up the receiver, and said something like, "Operator, give me 662 Kisumu." You'd put the receiver down, go sit outside under the mango tree, and eventually the phone would ring to tell you that your call had gone through. Not a dozen years later, I visited that same village. I was walking along a path and I saw a young boy and I said, "Do you know Neva Amutavi, one of my former students?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Can you go and get him for me?" And of course, he picked up his mobile phone and called him. Only a half a dozen years later, I was an ambassador in East Africa. And my African staff were using cheap mobile phones to pay their bills, conduct small business, and make calls anywhere and everywhere. And that's the lens through which I see innovation and development and how the two must join together. Innovation is making the impossible possible, the unsolvable solvable. And nowhere is this more true than international development. In the area of global health, for example, on the islands of Zanzibar, every single week, in 53 different places, healthcare workers are sending valuable test results on malaria by text message. In West Africa, we're supporting a tropical weather forecasting company that sends daily and seasonal forecasts via text message to 320,000 users across the region so they can plan against drought and the rains. In Jordan, and democracy and governance work, thanks to the work of a small American NGO, there's a simple mobile phone application called BaldiTak, which means your municipality in Arabic. BaldiTak enables citizen communities to collect and analyze citizen feedback on local governance performance, better connecting everyday Jordanians with their elected officials. To be clear, this isn't new technology, it's old technology. What's new is that all of us in development are finally embracing the possibilities. And that's really why we're here to celebrate Grand Challenges. This year I want to move the goalposts just a little bit. What I'd like to do with the Grand Challenge that we want to talk about is to sharpen its focus on the world's staggering humanitarian assistance needs. Ladies and gentlemen, today we face the largest displacement of people since World War II. There are 66 million displaced people in the world, asylum seekers, internally displaced, and refugees. That's like the entire country of the UK suddenly going homeless. Over 20 million people in Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen face life-threatening hunger. Now, America, I'm proud to say, is at the forefront of fighting these humanitarian challenges. 2 weeks ago at the United Nations General Assembly, we announced over $1 billion in additional humanitarian assistance to help millions of people affected by conflict and instability. But the reality is, as displacement and conflict grow with each passing day, there's simply not enough resources to do all that we would like to do or all that we should do. So we must find ways to be better than ever, more efficient than ever, and more effective than ever. We need new ideas and we need innovative thinking. We need you. We need you to help us think through a wide range of questions. Questions like, how can we better deliver medicine in the tropics to those in need? How do we more accurately track humanitarian assistance dollars? And how do we measure our impact? How do we educate children who are born and raised in these refugee camps? Children who come with each passing day. How do we promote more reliable, more affordable energy to displaced communities? How do we promote access to critical health innovations in conflict zones, fragile states, and displaced communities? How do we not only tend to immediate needs, but foster resilience in people and communities so they can better withstand future crisis? These are not easy questions to answer. If they were, I wouldn't be here. So in early 2018, in partnership with Grand Challenges Canada, USAID will issue its 10th Grand Challenge and its first ever Grand Challenge focusing on humanitarian assistance. Now, past Grand Challenges have helped us all tackle initiatives ranging from improving children's reading to fighting Ebola and Zika. Through these challenges, we've leveraged more than $500 million in grants and technical assistance. But of course, that's not the right measure. It's not the money, it's the results. Our Securing Water for Food Grand Challenge supports scientific and technological innovations to produce more food with less water in developing countries. This initiative has saved more than 3 billion liters of water and produced nearly 620,000 tons of food for more than 1.5 million farmers in poor regions. We also partner with the Gates Foundation to support pregnant women and newborns in poor, very hard-to-reach communities. This Saving Lives at Birth Grand Challenge has reached 1.5 million women and newborns, and yes, saved more than 10,000 lives. These are lives, but they're also hopes. They're hopes for a better future for so many people. What I've been saying since the first day I arrived at USAID is that the purpose of foreign assistance must be to end the need for its existence. I hope Global Innovation Week and these grand challenges will get us just a little bit closer to that day. Thank you for being here. Thanks for all that you've done. More importantly, thanks for all that you're going to do. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ambassador Green. So every year, as you may know, the Grand Challenges meeting overlaps with, for a day with the Keystone Symposia, a set of conferences. I am wondering if we have our Keystone friends. Has anybody joined from the Keystone Symposia? Can you raise your hands to see if we've got people, folks? Okay, wonderful. So welcome, everyone. So I would like to invite Dr. Diana Bianchi to the stage to welcome the Keystone participants. Dr. Bianchi, a world-renowned expert on prenatal testing, is director of the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development at the National Institute of Health. Dr. Bianchi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My challenge, so to speak, is to address the attendees of the Grand Challenges meeting, those of you who've been here for 3 days, and to simultaneously welcome the attendees of the Keystone Conference on Maternal-Fetal Crosstalk, Harmony versus Conflict. Please note that this is not a conference on living with a teenager, but rather a conference that examines the biological implications of the maternal-fetal relationship. At the same time, in my role as director of the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, one of 27 institutes at the National Institutes of Health, I'd like to highlight some of the research that we've funded and its impact on maternal and child health. NICHD funds a very broad portfolio that encompasses extremely basic, translational, and clinical research. While our institute's name would lead you to believe that we exclusively fund research related to child health, in fact, we only fund 18% of the pediatric research at the NIH. We do, however, fund the majority of research related to reproductive health in both men and women. Also, very few people realize that 6.5% of our budget is devoted to the National Center for Medical Rehabilitation Research. We fund studies on rehabilitation in both adults and children, and this encompasses recovery from stroke and limb loss as examples. The title of this session is Partnering for the World We Want. And in thinking about how to combine the audiences from the Gates and the Keystone conferences, I conceived of this as a partnership at many levels. The obvious one is the partnership and interaction that occurs between a pregnant woman and her fetus during pregnancy. However, other partnerships exist, such as at the cellular level, at the community level, and at the global level. I'm going to give you examples of NICHD-supported research and its impact on health for each of these. Back in 1990, with funding from the NICHD, my research laboratory was one of the first to discover that fetal cells from previous pregnancies could be found in the blood of non-pregnant women as many as 27 years following birth. This led to the concept of microchimerism, in which women who'd been previously pregnant carried what we then termed pregnancy-associated progenitor cells for decades. With continued funding from NICHD, we next explored whether there was any impact of the presence of those cells on maternal health. Now, what are you looking at here? This slide shows an example of a section of a thyroid from one of the subjects in a study that we performed. What you're looking at there that are in blue are the nuclei that are stained by a blue dye. And I'd like you to focus on the area marked by the arrow, which is a section of the thyroid. In this project, we studied specimens from 29 women who had their thyroids surgically removed for various reasons and compared them to thyroid specimens from 8 women who died of non-thyroid conditions. We also reviewed their pregnancy and medical histories. Now, in the next slide, we're looking at a higher magnification view of the area that we indicated by the arrow. Here, we've used a technique called fluorescence in situ hybridization, or FISH. Male cells, I hope you can see, are indicated by a green dot, which indicates the presence of a Y chromosome. And there's also a single pink dot, which indicates the presence of an X chromosome. These are male cells making a thyroid follicle in the middle of the mother's thyroid. The rest of the thyroid, which you can see in the lower left corner, has exclusively pink dots, indicating that these are female cells. Male cells were seen in 16 out of 29 of the subjects with thyroid disease, but not in controls. And these results correlated with the pregnancy histories. These results suggested that fetal cell crosstalk contributes to the remodeling of the maternal thyroid in the setting of thyroid disease, but not in normal thyroid tissue. We also found evidence of fetal cell crosstalk in mothers recovering from liver diseases such as hepatitis. Now, in putting together this talk, I thought, well, what can I tell Bill Gates that he doesn't know already? And this is also true for all the men in the audience. In case you're feeling a little bit left out because you've never been pregnant, in a different study, we examined tissues from newborn babies and showed that female cells, and here it's the reverse, we've got 2 green dots demonstrating the presence of 2 X chromosomes, that female cells could be detected in the tissues of male newborn infants. This suggested that the crosstalk was bidirectional, and it led one person to comment on our work, "You think your mother is looking over your shoulder, she's actually in your shoulder." So just think about that. So moving from partnering at the cellular level to individuals, I'd like to highlight an NICHD-sponsored research program called Brain Research to Ameliorate Impaired Neurodevelopment, home-based intervention trial, also known by its acronym BRAIN-HIT. This was a randomized clinical trial that was designed to evaluate the impact of a home-based, parent-provided early intervention module on the neurodevelopmental outcome of infants who'd been previously resuscitated for mild to moderate asphyxia. We have 7 current sites in our NICHD-sponsored Global Network for Women and Children's Health Research. This network was originally funded in 2001 by NICHD in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do capacity building and teaching families to improve health outcomes for pregnant women and young children in low-resource settings. Now, the BRAIN-HIT study was performed in a subset of our global network, and it took place in Zambia, Pakistan, and India. A teacher made home visits to show the parents how to provide stimulating activities with their infants and toddlers. The study infants received parent-implemented early developmental intervention combined with visits from parent trainers every other week for 3 years. The parents in the intervention and control groups received health and safety counseling during home visits on the same schedule. The main outcome measure was the Mental Developmental Index using the Bayley Infant Scales of Development. The results showed that both the Mental Developmental Index and the Psychomotor Developmental Index was higher in the intervention group. Now, moving to the community level, October happens to be Sudden Infant Death Syndrome Awareness Month, or SIDS. Since 1974, NICHD has been the federal focal point for research on SIDS. The research we supported helped to provide the foundation for the Back to Sleep campaign, now known as the Safe to Sleep campaign, which launched in 1994. Continued research, including the National Infant Sleep Position Study and case control studies in high-risk populations, has informed subsequent expansions of safe sleep recommendations. In a study co-funded by NICHD and the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, as well as the CDC, we investigated the higher incidence of SIDS in African American infants. The study found that African Americans were less likely than other racial or ethnic groups to be informed by a healthcare provider that they should place their babies to sleep on their backs as opposed to their stomachs or sides. The research findings helped to target outreach and community partnerships. Community leaders who became aware of the research findings took the next step to get trained, and they brought the results back to their local organizations, such as church groups. Over the past 16 years, NICHD has awarded approximately $800,000 in mini grant funds to conduct educational outreach in states where the rates of sudden infant death syndrome and other unexplained causes of infant deaths are high. We're currently working in Alabama, the state with the second highest sleep-related infant mortality rate, and partnering with the Alabama Department of Health to implement the recommendations shown in the brochure on the left side of the slide. Alaska is the state with the highest incidence of SIDS. NICHD also leads the Healthy Native Babies collaboration with American Indians and Alaska Native groups, where our research has shown that maternal alcohol use is associated with a dramatically increased risk of SIDS. The impact of these community-based efforts has been significant, resulting in a 50% decrease in the incidence of SIDS since the NICHD began the Safe to Sleep campaign. In fact, just yesterday, the FDA issued a recommendation based on NICHD-funded research findings that the use of sleep positioners, also known as bolsters or wedges, should be discontinued to reduce the chance of SIDS. So lastly, as an example of partnerships at the global level, I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing the Zika in Infants in Pregnancy study, also known as ZIP. Many people think that the threat from Zika has gone away. yet the impact of acquiring infection during pregnancy on infants and families has been staggering. It is critical to assess and to help the babies that have been born following Zika infection. The ZIP study is currently enrolling subjects at 10 sites in 6 countries. 2 sites are in Puerto Rico, 1 site in Colombia, 1 site in Peru, 1 is in Nicaragua, 1 is in Guatemala, and 4 are in Brazil. The study design is as follows. 10,000 women will be enrolled early in pregnancy and followed until after delivery. All babies will be followed until after birth, and in infancy, they will have neurodevelopmental, hearing, and ophthalmologic assessments. As of last week, almost 5,000 participants had been enrolled into the ZIP study. The types of maternal assessments are shown on this slide, and they include physical examinations, laboratory examinations, ultrasound examination. The women keep a diary of their symptoms, and there is also education. The infant assessments are shown on this next slide. All of the infants will get physical and developmental examinations, neuroimaging, ophthalmologic examinations, as I said, hearing examinations, etc. We currently have funding for up to 12 months of follow-up, but we hope to be able to study these children for a longer period of time. The ZIP study has been funded by the NIH, and it's been 3 institutes within the NIH, the NICHD, the NIEHS, and NIAID, as well as in partnership with Fiocruz in Brazil. And towards the goal of ultimately being able to share the data, NICHD has openly shared protocols and data collection forms with the groups indicated at the bottom of the slide. And speaking of data sharing, NICHD is fully committed to sharing de-identified clinical data and biospecimens via DASH, our data and specimen hub. The website is up at the top. It's https://dash.nichd.nih.gov. DASH is a centralized resource for researchers to store and access information from NICHD studies to allow secondary analyses. Currently, there are data available from 47 studies, many of which involve pregnancy and infant health. After registration, researchers can request data sets. By the end of the year, we anticipate making linked biospecimen sets available. Whereas NICHD pays for the archiving of these samples, the requester pays for the costs associated with pulling and mailing of them. We're actively promoting DASH as a way for early investigators to test hypotheses and obtain preliminary data. And I know that I've seen a lot of young people in the audience, and I want to encourage you to make use of these clinical data sets to get your careers off the ground. In summary, we are all the products of partnering or crosstalk at the cellular level. The ancient Greeks had the right idea. The picture here shows the chimera, and that's where the word microchimerism comes from. The chimera was the mythical Greek beast with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and the tail of a serpent. But crosstalk occurs at every level of human interaction. The brief examples I have highlighted here demonstrate the positive impact of support at the individual, community, and global levels. Lastly, a strong commitment to sharing data and biospecimens across the world will allow new investigators access to existing data sets. It will allow them to test innovative hypotheses, and it will increase all of our collective analytic power. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention. Thank you for what you do and what you're going to do, and I hope you enjoy the Keystone Conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Gates. If I could use just 2 words to describe our foundation, the Gates Foundation, and specifically what Bill and Melinda Gates believe in, they would be innovation and equity. I'm going to add my own and cheat a little bit, and I'm going to add a 3rd word, and that's optimism. Grand Challenges is driven by the large and diverse community here in this room and around the world. But in many ways, the vision started with Bill and Melinda. We exist to spur scientific technological innovation to create a more equal world. We do this because we are optimistic about the future. In this way, we are a testament to Bill and Melinda's worldview. It is my honor to ask you to join me in welcoming our foundation co-chair, Bill Gates.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to be here at Grand Challenges. This is one of my favorite events of the year. I remember in London sitting through some amazing scientific talks and really thinking about how those could really have a big impact to help the poorest. That's the dream of Grand Challenges, to take the very best science and have mind share for the challenges in developing countries to solve the equity agenda. And I'm really thrilled at the progress we've made. We may not have the mind share proportional to the burden yet, but we certainly have a lot more, including a lot of the top people in the field. With Grand Challenges, we're always adding new partners. We have great partners, and we're trying to be creative in new formats. Large grants, small grants, thematic challenges, open-ended challenges. And it's always an opportunity when we get together to learn what's working, to hear from you about how these funding sources eventually do create solutions and get those solutions out to have impact. It's very appropriate that we're here in Washington, D.C. Some of the key organizations that really drive global health are based here. The United States, whether it's the research commitment through NIH and so many of the institutes, whether it's through USAID, who we just heard from Mark Green, is a wonderful organization, and also the Center for Disease Control, of course, down in Atlanta, is also an amazing partner in global health on many, many issues. For example, in polio, they are really the key technical partner working with our foundation, getting us now very much, we think, on the verge of eradicating polio, the 2nd disease ever to achieve that. So the United States has played a central role in a lot of this global health innovation. And whether it's the voters, the taxpayers, the politicians, the U.S. should be very proud of what incredible impact it's had. After all, the field of global health is achieving some phenomenal results. We're all impatient. We don't want it to happen a lot faster. But if you look at the key metrics, for example, children under 5 who die, we have come a long ways. In 1990, that was over 11 million. Today, it's less than half of that at about 5 million. A few weeks ago, there was a big event, which was the United Nations General Assembly. And there, of course, the UN, through the Sustainable Development Goals, has stated some very ambitious targets to achieve by 2030. And that includes taking this under 5 mortality and cutting it in half again, getting it down from over 5 million to below 2.5 million. And that's very ambitious. In fact, if you look at it, the difference between staying where we are and getting there, that's over 20 million lives. And so we have to intervene in a much better way. And one thing that's tricky about under 5 deaths is that the mix of countries where children are being born is changing quite dramatically. Even as the world gets richer, there's one group of people who are getting poorer every year, and that's kids who are born. We've reached the peak birth rate, that was about 5 years ago at 137 million, and that's coming down. So there's less and less babies born, but they are born overwhelmingly into poor countries. And so that mix shift means that the health environment of newborns, if we don't do anything, under 5 mortality rates will go up quite a bit simply because they're not being born, say, in Finland, they're being born in Angola. Now, this idea of measuring where we are and always having feedback and knowing the numbers is another area our foundation is invested in. In fact, just last week, International Health Metrics and Evaluation, IHME, which is out at the University of Washington, celebrated their 20th anniversary. And they've been a key partner in taking the field data that often comes from surveys or trials that you're involved in, taking that data and creating an overall picture, getting it so that it comes out on a timely basis, it's broken down more by disease. Now moving to even do it at 5 by 5 kilometer geographic areas. So instead of thinking of a country as having a malaria rate, we think of that each of those geographical blocks as having a malaria rate. So the data is getting far better, and it's helping to guide us. One thing we did recently with them is to do a forecast. And in this forecast, we took the trend of what's going on with normal economic growth. We took a trend where we assumed that the best practices were adopted and spread more rapidly than ever. And then we took a trend that assumed that funding levels went down and best practices did not transmit. And what we showed is that the good scenario, the green scenario, was dramatically different than the red scenario. In fact, in a few cases, it came out even more dramatically than I expected. For child to death, it actually showed, because of economic progress, that the death rate would continue to go down somewhat. It plateaus out a little bit, but then isn't the same rate that we've seen before. If we spread best practices, it can go down, and that's where you get those 20 million lives. In the case of HIV, what we saw was that even a 10% cut would lead to a bad situation. In that case, to 5 million additional deaths. And that's because of a couple of reasons. One is that the age cohort who's susceptible to HIV infection, primarily age 16 to 24, is over double the size now as it was back in 1990 when the epidemic achieved its last peak. And the second thing is, this is an infectious disease. So if you cut funding, the delivery system's not going to work as well. And of course, everyone who gets infected is then exponentially, again, somebody who can infect other people. So generally with infectious disease, you're not in equilibrium. You're either it's growing or it's shrinking. You know, only R zeros are only at 1, you know, kind of rarely. And so here we see we are at that tricky equilibrium. And so we have to be very smart in terms of using the tools we have today to even maintain where we are. And that gets us to me my key point, which is when we were sitting and drawing those lines, making the assumptions about what would happen between now and 2030, in every case I sat there saying, but if we have innovation, if we have a breakthrough, we can do better than the best case. And you know, so that's what's super exciting, is that even though those tools can be used more effectively, we can raise vaccine coverage, the most optimistic scenario, and the one that's gotten us to this point, is based on the kind of work you do, which is the innovation. And that's really why I'm so passionate about grand challenges. It really is the source of optimism about why the future of health in developing countries will not be the same as the past. Let me dive a little bit more into HIV, because that, both in terms of innovation and generosity, is such a phenomenal story, and a story that the United States has played a very, very central role in it. In terms of getting resources out for treatment, the fact that the death rates have come down very dramatically, that's largely a combination of PEPFAR, started under President Bush, which is 100% US funded, and Global Fund, which is 1/3 US funded. The ARV treatment, the prevention programs are overwhelmingly, over 60% funded through those two programs. And the results have been quite phenomenal. The death rate is way, way down from its peak. It's not down at zero, and it's interesting to think why it's so tough to get everybody tested and on treatment and maintaining that treatment. But not only are we saving those lives, we are avoiding the infection rates going up very, very dramatically. But it's very tough to continue business as usual, because with HIV, because the ARVs are not a cure, you have to keep taking them lifelong. Every year that more people get infected and survive by eventually being put on ARVs, that pool of people living with HIV gets larger and larger. And so if you only have flat funding, and if you don't constantly innovate in terms of getting the cost per patient per year down, then you have a problem. Eventually, that doesn't work. So in a sense, all that mind-blowing generosity is simply holding the finger in the dike until we can come along with some dramatic innovation. Ideally, we would like innovation in many different ways. We would like prophylaxis, whether it's something like a device you insert that releases preventative drugs because the daily dosing has had such compliance problems. Ideally, of course, a vaccine that you take once and you're protected for the rest of your life. And then, of course, simplifying the treatment regime for those who have HIV, ideally getting something that is almost like a functional cure. So we only through innovation can we achieve the dreams that we have about HIV. When people talk about an HIV-free generation, that is not a possibility without innovation. The current tools we have today actually will not keep this epidemic in check. If we look at the resources spent, today it's about $1 billion spent on the breakthrough, and just for the US alone, about $7 billion spent on prevention. Now, the best case here is if we get those great tools, is that you would take that $1 billion and you would then have it to work on other diseases, and you would take that $7 billion, which in the world of global health is a phenomenal amount of resource. You would take that and be able to use that for other things. HIV treatment is 25% of all global health aid, and it's an amazing thing. And of course, it's up from 0% before PEPFAR came along. But that it would be phenomenal if over time we could get those tools. The progress, it's very tantalizing. It's proven to be difficult, but there's a lot of things in the works that are very exciting, whether it's the VSV Johnson candidate, the P5 trial, the work with antibodies, the work with CMV. A lot of things are showing great promise in that prevention front, and so we need to drive forward. We need the resources to be there, again, with the US playing a role, but with many, many other partners participating in that. Malaria is a similar situation. The number of malaria deaths are down by 60%, and that's due to a combination the indoor residual spraying, and the bed nets. 1 billion bed nets have been delivered, 1 billion ACT treatments, which are, of course, the drugs that avoid the resistance problems. And we have 8 countries in South Africa where we're talking to them about actually doing local malaria eradication, where if we intensified the tools, these are countries in the south where malaria is not as intense as it is in the equatorial regions, that we could actually, it looks like, do local eliminations. However, it won't be easy. The level of compliance to taking the drugs, reporting cases, using bed nets is very, very high. We do a lot of great modeling through people like the Institute for Disease Modeling to see how tough malaria eradication is. And so to make it really tractable, even in the southern countries that are easier, or to eventually make it tractable so that you can go after the heart of malaria, which is up in Africa, we need tools that knock down vector populations pretty dramatically. And so if you go in with treatment tools to clear out the human reservoir, by at least for a period of years reducing the vector population, the rate of reinfection is dramatically reduced. So you don't need a permanent reduction if you're doing it by bottlenecking with the human carriage, but you do need help during a period of time. So this goes back to 12 years ago, where of all the grand challenges things we funded, you know, one of the things that certainly seemed the most unusual and you know, we weren't clear where it would go was this idea of homing endonuclease genes and engineering a mosquito that either couldn't transmit the parasite or that would spread the trait and knock down the mosquito population. And the work went very well. It was very, very promising. But the idea of how you would engineer it in a practical way, really it was only a decade later where CRISPR-Cas9 and all the other new gene editing tools come along, make it look like from a scientific and a creation point of view, this could be a key tool. Of course, you know, we have all the challenges to make sure that it's practical and can be controlled in the right ways and getting through the regulatory processes. But, you know, I would expect that it's very likely this will be a key tool, along with the others, that will allow us to go after reducing the malaria map. And it's a great example of something that without grand challenges, that long period of time, the risk involved, you know, probably wouldn't have gotten funded, and now it looks like we'll have that in our arsenal. In the meantime, of course, vector interventions against Aedes, against things like Zika, that's also going very well. And that's another grand challenge piece of work that involves the putting the Wolbachia to make the spread of the virus even more difficult. So our vector programs, of all the grand challenge things, those have done particularly well. Now, in the case of HIV and malaria, we know basically what the biological mechanism of the disease is, and therefore the kind of tool that we need is pretty clear. We have a couple other areas like nutrition and neonatal deaths where understanding exactly what the pathogen is and therefore what the best way to intervene is not as clear. And so we need a lot of basic understanding, R&D, and understanding those first 28 days of life. About half the deaths now, and of course an increasing percentage as we make progress on things like malaria, is that first 28 days. I remember when I first looked at the World Development Report back in 1993, you know, where I was understanding about developing world health, it was all just grouped into one category. You know, subsequently, it's broken down into sepsis and asphyxia. But again, that's not explanatory in terms of knowing exactly what we need to do. Now, naively, when I was talking to our early scientists about this, I said, well, why don't we just do autopsies? And, you know, we'll go and see, isn't I see that on TV. They do autopsies. That's what you do, right, if you want to know what somebody dies from. Well, of course, in terms of cost and expertise and permission, the idea of taking that rich-world technique and applying it in any direct sense to gain this understanding wasn't going to be practical. But over a period of time, some great investigators created the idea of a minimally invasive autopsy, and which leaves no marks, low-cost instrumentation, and yet gathers enough information that it's shared in the right way, is giving us some of those deep insights. So the foundation has created what we call the CHAMPS program, and that's to get in and have these deeper understandings. Already, even though we're only about a year into it, and we're seeing very good results in terms of parents' willingness to have this procedure performed after death, we've seen that 66% of these things that were called complications of prematurity actually have infectious causes. And so the hope there is that by grouping those and looking at what the tools are, whether it's maternal vaccination or antibodies or use of antibiotics in some way, that we will be able to reduce those deaths. And that's the kind of thing that gives us a chance to get even below 2.5 million. Literally, the goal, of course, is to have health equity, where a child born anywhere in the world, just because it's a poor country, they aren't dramatically more at risk. Another thing that's emerged that's fascinating about preterm birth is that we did a gene association study, and we're able to see that there's that the processing of selenium and estrogen are implicated in prematurity. And we were able to do that. We had a big enough sample set, partly because of a partnership with 23andMe to get the large amount of data to let you see things like that. So that's allowing us now to go back, work with some of you and figure out what the intervention would be like, for example, to get selenium levels up and to see if that can be a big impact. So there's incredible promise, incredible progress. Reminding people about our success stories, I think, is more important now. As countries think about their priorities, they have to know that the benefits here, the possibilities here are really quite incredible. We need to draw new donors in as much as possible. We need to build up the scientific capacity in these developing countries. A lot that we need to do. But my belief is that we can not only achieve the best case for those various diseases that have to do with adopting best practices, that because of innovation, that we'll be able to do even better than that. One of the Grand Challenge tactics that we've used is very small grants that we call the Grand Challenge explorations. Small application, very high risk. Most of them do not proceed either because the science doesn't work or it's not recognized what the potential is, but a lot of those stop at that $100,000 level. But we're doing an evaluation of that and seeing, okay, where did it work? How can that be better? And I'm sure all of you will help us see how to evolve that. We have made progress in Grand Challenges in involving more Southern partners. That's something we want to figure out how to do even more. So the original premise of Grand Challenge is that there's great scientific understanding, that scientists really do want to work on these problems, and that we can make big progress. We feel very good that was correct. Again, I want to thank our partners. We're very committed to this work, to making sure there's more resources. And again, this year the science has been amazing, and so we can look forward to a lot of improvements in global health. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. In the spirit of beating the best case, our next speaker is Rebecca Richard-Kortum, a bioengineer and the director of Rice 360, Rice University's Institute of Global Health. Rebecca was recently awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant, and she will give our next and the third Grand Challenges Spotlight talk, and she'll speak about the project she's working on. Please help me welcome Rebecca on stage.
This summer, I received a letter from the granddaughter of Rice University's first president. She wrote something that really stayed with me. She said, "My grandparents lost a lovely 18-month-old daughter due to diarrhea and dehydration in 1906. Today, more than 100 years later, it's hard to imagine any university president in the United States worrying that they might lose a toddler to diarrhea. And as you just heard, there's been tremendous progress to reduce child death all around the world. But progress to improve newborn survival in the world's poorest places has been frustratingly slow. Today, 45% of child deaths occur in the first month of life. And the #1 cause of child death is preterm birth. I am here because I believe that we can solve this problem. We have, for the first time, a global target for newborn survival in the SDGs. And this target, it comes at a very exciting time. It comes at a time when 80% of women around the world are going to health facilities to deliver their babies. But unfortunately, this shift in facility births, it has not translated into improvements in newborn survival. Why not? Well, unfortunately, all too often, when women actually reach the health facility, they find those health facilities are very poorly equipped. This picture was taken at a district hospital in Malawi, and it shows the newborn unit there. Let's think about what actually led to improvements in newborn and infant survival in the United States. In the 1960s, we established a regional system of newborn units that were fully equipped with the technology that was necessary to deliver comprehensive newborn care. And when we did this, we saw newborn mortality drop by 60%. We need to provide the same kind of equipment at newborn units and facilities all around the world. But we can't simply ship equipment in that was designed to work in America's air-conditioned hospitals. We delivered oxygen concentrators like this one to district hospitals all across Malawi. What we found was that in 2 years, 2/3 of those oxygen concentrators wound up here. They wound up in the equipment graveyard because they could not withstand the harsh environmental conditions of these facilities. And local biomedical technicians did not have the tools or the spare parts to repair them. So if we want to solve this problem, we need a different kind of equipment. We need equipment that is rugged, that is affordable, and that is effective. Now, with support from Saving Lives at Birth, our team developed a rugged, affordable CPAP machine that was designed to help the more than 50% of preterm babies who struggle to breathe because their lungs are immature. When CPAP was rolled out in the United States in the late 1960s, we saw that survival for preterm babies with respiratory distress, it improved from 25 to 70%. And when we introduced CPAP in Malawi, what we found was a very similar 40% improvement in survival. Now, we partnered to commercialize that technology and to secure international regulatory approval. And today, CPAP is sold for 1/10 the cost of systems used in the United States, and it is now saving newborn lives in 30 countries. Now, we are not alone in these efforts. My colleagues at DREV designed affordable, rugged phototherapy lights that are treating newborn jaundice in 46 countries. This hospital in Nigeria shows those lights in use. But what that hospital lacks is they lack the tools to diagnose jaundice. And to fill that gap, our team developed a $150 reader that can be used together with a 5-cent disposable to diagnose jaundice at the bedside in less than a minute. Can you tell if this baby is too cold? Based on data from African hospitals, there is a 60 to 85% chance that she is hypothermic. And we know that for every 1 degree drop in admission temperature, there is a 28% increase in the chance of mortality. Hypothermia, it is an invisible medical emergency in short-staffed wards that lack vital signs monitors. To address this challenge, we have developed a very simple $25 monitor that tracks a baby's temperature. It records it digitally and displays warning lights to indicate if the child is hypothermic. And to help parents know if their babies are cold at home, my colleagues at Bempoo designed this very simple wrist-worn monitor to alert parents when their babies are hypothermic. Now, as we rolled CPAP out across Malawi, we found it was not enough to provide breathing support if babies were cold or if they also suffered from jaundice. And the lesson, of course, is if we continue to deliver these technologies one at a time, then outcomes will continue to be unacceptably low. We need to deliver the package of technologies to enable clinicians to deliver comprehensive care. We are assembling that package of technologies. We call it Newborn Essential Solutions and Technologies, or NEST. And it is a simple set of less than 20 technologies. This video shows you what a ward equipped with NEST would look like. And we estimate that NEST could be delivered for less than $1.50 per birth. That is less than the cost of vaccines that we have successfully scaled in this region. Now, the motto of my organization, it's on this t-shirt, it is innovation conquers inequality. But as we have begun to scale up NEST, I have come to learn that inequality, it kicks the crap out of innovation if you do not do two other things. You have to provide access and you have to provide sustainability. Assembling a package of technologies, it actually helps us tackle the access challenge. My colleagues at DREV and Bempoo, they are struggling with the same distribution challenges that we struggle with. Imagine how expensive soda would be if Coca-Cola used one set of trucks to deliver Coke, and another set of trucks to deliver Coke Light, and a third set of trucks to deliver Sprite. If we bundle things together in packages, we can spread the cost of distribution out across that package. And it makes the market large enough to be enticing to the private sector. Now, how do we deal with sustainability? I believe that the secret to sustainability is to educate and build capacity for local biomedical engineers. We need to train engineers to develop innovations to address local needs. And with support from the Lemelson Foundation, we have worked with the largest engineering school in Malawi to incorporate invention education throughout the entire curriculum. This summer, we had teams of students from Rice University and from Malawi Polytechnic, and they went to the equipment graveyard, and they pulled those oxygen concentrators out, and they developed locally appropriate ways to repair them, and they came up with ways to strengthen the design of those concentrators to make them more rugged, to last in that environment. And They are the key to sustainability because once we solve this challenge in the newborn ward, these young innovators will go on to solve challenges in surgery, in maternity, in oncology, and on and on and on. Today, I think about all the innovations that have been developed since the death of baby girl Levitt in 1906. Space flight, automobiles, computers, the internet, women in engineering. It is not acceptable that in 2017, there are still 1 million babies dying in Africa every year, most from preventable causes. What am I asking of you? I'm asking two things. Believe with me that it is possible to solve this problem. We have everything we need. We have international will in the SDGs. We have the right technology to deliver comprehensive care. We have affordable ways to deliver this technology, and we have the means to educate the next generation of innovators to sustain it. And second, work with our team. We know we need absolutely the best package of innovations. We know the technology is not enough, that we need to work with clinicians, with policymakers, with commercial manufacturers, and distributors. We cannot quit until we solve this problem. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Rebecca. So I'm back up to just let you know that we're reshuffling the agenda just a tiny bit. So we're bringing 2 more Grand Challenges Spotlight speakers while we wait for our last keynote speaker to arrive. So Ms. Reed is the founder of Real Gardening. She's our Grand Challenges Spotlight speaker, USAID partner. And Dr. Yazdi is a professor at Johns Hopkins. And to give you a little bit more context about Yusuf Yazdi's talk, we'll watch a short video about USAID's response to the Ebola epidemic. Thank you.
Hearing about the Ebola virus, when they told me that I had a virus, it was scary. It was like it was my time to die.
It was worse than the war. Everybody had to come together to fight Ebola. In terms of taking care of any kind of emergencies like that, many of our facilities are not able to cope with. They don't have any kind of space, and they are not able to take care of isolation things.
People were afraid to go to the hospital. People were also afraid to help people. I contracted a virus when I was working as orthopedic technician in the hospital.
We never knew what we were dealing with, and we've not catered to such a disease entity before. One of the first laws of nature is self-preservation. You can't continue to go into a fight if you can save yourself or prevent yourself from dying.
We didn't really have an ideal location to isolate patients. We used our chapel. It wasn't even designed as a place to provide health care.
Being at ETU was like, was beyond bad, because just from outside, you take into somewhere where you see people with different eye color, some eyes red, people vomiting, lying down, some already dead. So it was very traumatic.
In the midst of crisis, the first goal is to see how best you can use the available resources while you call out for help.
Efforts to innovate are stimulated by these kinds of crises, but the product of the innovations are things that will affect us and improve care even in the absence of a crisis.
For Baylor, the Grand Challenge funding that we received gave us the opportunity to innovate, and with the help of USAID, we've turned a concept into a true thing. We went to Sierra Leone with USAID. We visited 4 ETUs. The feedback that we received from individuals like Dr. Brown and Dr. Fankhauser and others that were either treating patients or infected themselves is pivotal. This unit can be deployed in 5 minutes. We start with the shipping container, an 8x20, so it's just a box. There is no requirement for power, so it's just 4 guys and it's open.
Having pre-built pods that can move on trucks into these locations and be deployed in a matter of hours to days instead of weeks to, in some cases, months, would have allowed us to contain things much more quickly here in the country.
Ebola was here, but now it's over, and it was really with US government support. We need to move forward, but we also need to remember that if it happens, we need to prevent it. If it happens, we do have to take care of it.
The very day I was told that I'm leaving the ETU, I was all happy. That is, I was feeling like at least I'm safe. The new ETU will help to save people's lives. After I survived the Ebola virus, the health ministry called me and I started training health workers. And whenever an outbreak occurs, I'll be willing to go and help my people.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and thank you for the organizers of this great event. Over the last few days, we've learned about some of the threats to human health and human potential that really affect all of us. There's not a single person in this room that is not at risk. It's sad that in human history, too often, this shared frailty, this shared neediness, weakness, has led us to conflict, to fear, even to war. But what I've seen in the last few days and in these videos is something really amazing, is this same human frailty can become a blessing and force us to recognize that shared risk and to work together to solve it. But working together requires an effective model. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the model that we've developed. For example, corporations, America's medtech corporations lead the world. It's one of the industries where America still leads. And I started at my career after graduate school at Johnson & Johnson. And after 12 years of working there, I can say when I first went there, my family was a little bit aghast. I was the first person to go to the dark side and work for a large multinational corporation. It wasn't looked upon positively. But after 12 years, I learned that the people there had their heart in the right place, and the resources are there to really have a major impact on healthcare around the world. Now, 8 years into, as a faculty member at Johns Hopkins, I've seen tremendous innovation and creativity and expanding the frontiers of knowledge at our great academic institutions, which also are the best in the world. So you would imagine if these two got together and worked together, there's no healthcare challenge that they could not overwhelm. But that potential has not been realized. I think a new model is needed to really get these organizations to work together and to bring together other partners as well, governments and NGOs. And this is true both in the US and internationally. So with your permission, I'd like to say a few words about the model that we've created over the past 7 years at Johns Hopkins University. We have a humble experiment going on up the road about an hour in Baltimore. And it's a center that's focused on two things: training the next generation of innovators for both US and global health, and in creating innovative solutions that have a high potential to actually have an impact. I love this photo. I chose it. It's a picture of one of our teams in a rural clinic, in a maternity clinic in Nepal. I like it for two reasons. One, it shows the diversity of the students that come into the program. One is from Singapore, one from India, one from China, and one from the United States. It also highlights an important difference in the way we do things. We don't do bench to bedside. We don't start with a technology or start with an approach. We start with careful listening and understanding what the problem is and the context in which the problem exists. And then we bring in a wide range of partners, including companies and NGOs, to work with us. Our students learn a tremendous amount from these partnerships. They learn best practices from industry. Industry has a lot to bring to bear and a lot to teach us about global health innovation. But the opposite is also true. When I finished my grad school at UT Austin and went to work for J&J's Ethicon Endosurgery Division, I made a stop in Houston where my uncle, who's a surgeon there, he's the oldest person in the family, so it's customary for me to go and say goodbye to him as I'm leaving. And I asked him, I said, "Have you heard of Ethicon Endosurgery?" He says, yeah. Do you use their products? Yes, of course I do. I'm a surgeon, general surgeon. Do they work well? Yes, they're incredibly effective. Do you like them? He says, "I hate them." Really? I was taken aback. He used to practice, when he was a young surgeon, he would practice surgery in a small clinic on the shores of the Caspian Sea. He would do an appendectomy and someone would give him a goat or a sheep or something. And for him, the idea of a stapler with 7 staples in it that cost $250 that you throw away at the end of the procedure was just, it went against every bone in his body. There's a tremendous amount that America's medtech industry can learn in working in global health about what it takes to build an effective solution at extremely low cost. And God knows we need those kind of solutions, both internationally, of course, but also in healthcare systems like America. Working with these partners ensures several things. It ensures that first of all, we're working on the right problem. And second of all, it ensures that the solution that we're working on is something that has a high potential, at least, to make it all the way into manufacturing and profitable, at least sustainable deployment. The model that we use, there's a lot of issues that have to be dealt with for successful medtech innovation. Healthcare innovation is very complicated. Who knew? It was only realized recently that healthcare is so complicated. There's issues, of course, you have to understand the clinical issues and the technical issues. You have to be great engineers and great designers. But if you neglect any of these others, commercial issues, implementation issues, regulatory, reimbursement, et cetera, and also organizational strategic issues, those can kill your project. In the industry, we called them late-stage failures, where you've invested a lot, and we've seen a lot of that in global health innovation as well. It's critically important that we don't waste resources. If we're going to solve these problems, we don't waste resources on these late-stage failures. So how do you deal with all of these issues at the same time? It can be very daunting. The approach we take is an iterative approach, where we start and build up gradually our understanding of the problem over time. We take an iterative path, and this is a path that is taken by a team that works together from the very beginning with all these downstage partners. For example, when it comes to regulation of medical devices, if we're developing a product for the US, the team will meet with people from the FDA for brief conversations. What would be your perspective on solving this problem? And then later on, as the project develops, they'll do more and more in-depth analysis of the regulation. The same thing goes for their business plan, their business model. The same thing goes for the depth of their understanding of the clinical issues. And, of course, their design develops over time as well, as their team and their people build up. At each stage, there's careful attention paid to make sure the team's on the right track. And these teams travel together throughout the world. We've worked over the years with Medtronic. A few years ago, we had the CEO of Medtronic, Omar Ishrak, came, and he gave us a challenge. He said, I want you to figure out why patients who need pacemakers in India are not getting these life-saving devices. And don't tell me it's because they're too expensive. I already know that. And I also know the story is a lot more complicated than that. And it was. And we, together with Medtronic engineers and experts, traveled throughout hospitals in rural India, from the most advanced in the big cities to some of the most poor clinics. You could barely call them clinics, in the Sundarbans in the Bay of Bengal. And what we found is that there's some tremendous insights into how patients travel through the system, and there's ways you can impact that overall problem at many stages along the way. And we're doing the same with Boston Scientific in how to make GI procedures more accessible internationally, especially in India. And with Jhpiego, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about one project we worked on with them in Kenya. We had a team that went to clinics that were screening and treating women for precancerous lesions. And this is a treatment that can have a tremendous impact on the survival of women and have a big effect on the ravages of cervical cancer. And what the team found is that this is very impactful, but the device being used, which is up on the upper left there, is complicated and cumbersome and difficult. So the challenge that the team narrowed down on was, how do you take this effective cryoablation therapy and make it easier to use and simpler? And they came up with this device called the CryoPop. It's as effective as the existing product, but it's simpler and cheaper and easier to use. And this, with the support of the GE Foundation, has now completed clinical trials in the Philippines. We could not have done this if we had not brought in all of these late-stage partners together. When the Ebola crisis broke out, we received word of this challenge put out by USAID through their Center for Accelerating Innovation and Impact. See what can be done about a variety of things, but the one we focused on was personal protective gear. And what we did is we assembled a team of over 100 people from across Johns Hopkins within 3 weeks. And people showed up from all across the campus: public health, robotics, APL. We even had a dressmaker, a wedding gown maker from across the street, came and said, can I join in on this? I know how to make garments. We joked that she created she knows how now to design a wedding dress that can be doffed in 30 seconds. But the team, one of the things that USAID pushed us to is to form these critical partnerships early on. They really were synergistic with this thought. So we worked very closely with DuPont from the very beginning, and they have licensed this IP, and they're in development to further commercialize it. The same thing happened in 2016 with the Zika outbreak. We formed, again, another hackathon. We generated some great ideas from a very diverse group of people working with industry, and now we've developed a tool to track mosquitoes, and actually the device is very inexpensive, and the images are transmitted automatically to the cloud, where very, very complicated and sophisticated algorithms detect exactly the kind of mosquito and present a heat map to caregivers and government officials in how to deal with a certain outbreak. In all of these, as Professor Richards-Gordon mentioned, the key, most important thing are people. People that will continue to do this work over and over again. I'll give you a story that really touched me. One of the things that Administrator Green mentioned, the humanitarian crisis that we're all facing, and the Middle East has borne the brunt of that. In 2006, war broke out between Israel and Lebanon. And we happened to have in our class that year students from both of these countries with deep emotional ties to both countries. And I was amazed to see how well they worked together, despite their differences, because they were addressing a healthcare challenge that they both knew could affect them and their loved ones and every human being on the planet. That inspired us to create a program that would bring together students from the United States and the Middle East to do humanitarian design challenges. So we did a draft of that, a practice session in June at AUB in Beirut. And I'd like to announce that now we have the funding to do 3 of these events, humanitarian hackathons, or design challenges, jointly between students in the United States and Lebanon, and then students in the United States and Gaza. And those will be starting actually this January. So our hope is that if this is successful, we will continue and include other students from other countries in the region, including Israel, Iran, and Turkey. Whether it's new models for partnership between industry or academia, or joint teams working across nations, our shared humanity, our shared frailty, is in reality a blessing, compelling us to work together to design better health for all of us. Thank you.
When I was 16, my parents told me that if I planted vegetables in our small urban backyard, they would buy the vegetables from me. I was excited to make additional pocket money. I don't know how many of you have actually tried to grow your own food from seed, though. It's a lot more complicated than one would think. I was overwhelmed when having to choose the correct seed and fertilizer for the area I was in and the month I wanted to plant. I soon became very angry that I needed to buy so much seed. Those seemingly small packets have a whole lot of seed in them, way more seed than I actually had space available to plant. And there I was, sitting in the middle of the dirt with a tape measure between my knees, trying to get the seed to stay in the ground as per the instruction. I felt like I needed an additional pair of hands. I went inside and I asked Maggie, my nanny, to come and help me. It was in Maggie's apprehension to help that she started to relay her own planting experience to me. It wasn't dissimilar to mine, but Maggie had faced challenges that I hadn't. Maggie couldn't read the instructions on the back of the seed packet, so she ended up sprinkling the seed, patting it down, and hoping for the best. Where Maggie lived, there wasn't access to piped water. She had to walk and collect it and carry it back in a bucket. She now had to take this precious resource and put it on a bare patch of earth in the hope that it was touching a seed. Maggie did this, and when small shoots began to emerge, she became really excited. She carried on nurturing them and spending her time and water on it, only to realize weeks later that what she had been nurturing were in fact weeds and not the food that she had desired. Maggie said the entire process made her feel defeated, made her feel like she didn't have enough educational resources needed to successfully grow her own food. I was on day 1 of my planting journey. I too felt defeated. It was in that moment that I decided I wanted to come up with a way that would make planting simple, effective, but most importantly, fun for both Maggie and myself. You came in today and you had a seed tape on your seats. Pick it up. Let me explain to you how real gardening works. Real gardening places the seed and the correct nutrients for that crop in a biodegradable, color-coded paper tape. The seed is correctly spaced, and to plant it, you place it vertically in the soil so that the colored portion is visible above. That places your seed at the correct depth. There's a break in color above the seed that shows you exactly where to water. That will also show you where your plants are going to come out. This is supposed to play. Can we play the video? Perfect. So the seeds will pop up out of the paper, correctly spaced. The paper will slowly biodegrade and create more nutrients in the soil while keeping the water close to the roots. Real gardening hosts a variety of benefits. The water saving is one. It protects the seed from birds, from pests such as cutworm. It differentiates where your plant's going to come up and shows you exactly where to water. It stops the water traveling the seed to the lowest point of the garden. But the most exciting bit that we're happy about is the fact that it makes planting fun. It entices our generation that has lost contact with the soil and in turn their food to connect with the soil and to grow their own. The first challenge I faced as a social entrepreneur was understanding how to create impact, not only in when my product is used, but also in when my product is manufactured. I created a really simple machine, and we've been able to hire previously unemployed single moms to manufacture our product. This is our workshop in Johannesburg, and that's Dorcas on one of our machines. Dorcas is able to produce 1.5 kilometers of seed tape a day. The beauty of the model is the more seed tape we have to sell, the more moms we get to employ. The second challenge I faced was understanding that the person I wanted to serve the most, the child-headed household in the school at the base of the pyramid, was living in a hand-to-mouth situation and was unable to afford my product. Through working with the Securing Water for Food Grand Challenge, I was able to adapt my business model to focus on selling our product to the people that could afford it and enabling us to donate our product to those that can't. To date, we've been able to implement more than 3,000 school and community gardens across South Africa. We've been able to do this by leveraging our Give One through corporate social investment funds and grants. We started to talk extensively with the teachers at these schools and asked them how better we could serve them. The feedback we got was that they wanted smaller gardens that could be placed anywhere in the school, and gardens that they could use as a teaching tool with not only a focus on food security, but a focus on teaching the next generation to get excited about growing in their own households. We developed the Grow Pod in response to this. The Grow Pod can be placed on any surface and filled with any kind of soil. It's packed according to the month and the season of planting, and it's extremely effective. We then worked with educational experts to develop a teacher's guide and a set of worksheets that link the Grow Pod to the curriculum, enabling the teacher and empowering the teacher to be able to teach using the Grow Pod. We've implemented this in over 2,300 schools across South Africa, and the requests are rolling in from more schools who want to do the same. When we started Real Gardening 5 years ago, we realized that we needed to do a training program in the schools to enable people to understand how to look after the garden. We have an extensive training program and a network of trainers based across the country. The training program runs over 4 months, and the training happens once a month for those 4 months. While the training has been very well received, what we started to realize was that when people went to go and use the knowledge in their garden after the training, be it days or weeks later, they became flustered with exactly what their garden needed then. Even though we gave a workbook over and a guide with the training, people still found it difficult to understand exactly what they needed to do. And what happens is if someone starts to get flustered or confused, they start to retreat from their garden, and that leads to the gardens failing. We turned to technology, and we created an app called the Planting Revolution. You put in the app exactly what you've planted on that day, the 5 vegetables that you've got in your garden in a box, and it will populate your planting journey according to exactly what you planted, and it will tell you each day exactly what you need to do in your garden according to what you've planted. We pride ourselves in the fact that to reach success, you only need to spend 5 minutes or less in your garden each day. The app even populates your calendar and reminds you to water. We do know that many of the areas we work in have difficulty accessing data. We partnered with Virgin Mobile in South Africa, and the app links to the Virgin Mobile network. We've got a gamification of points aspect, that the more you look after your garden, the more points you receive, and these points in turn become more data. You actually receive far more data than you need to look after your garden during that period. Real Gardening as a social enterprise realizes that in order to scale, we need to increase our sales. And we need to look outside of our borders to do this. We have looked at we are fortunate enough to be collaborating with what we feel is one of the most effective sales forces in the United States. But a sales force that also shares our vision and our value. I would like you all to welcome Vail to the stage. Vail is in her 5th year of the Girl Scouts, and she is proud, as well as I am, that through this collaboration, we're able to make the Garden in a Box available for purchase and delivery throughout North America via the Girl Scouts online store. The wonderful thing about this collaboration is the more products we're able to sell, the more gardens we're able to implement and get growing in America, the more gardens we're able to deliver within South Africa. Thank you very much. She's just amazing, so full of energy. So I would like to ask you all to join the planting revolution, to take the small seed tape you have today, go home, find a sunny spot, plant it, ignite that joy of growth. And when you're ready, expand your garden. Go to thegirlscouts.org, buy a garden in a box, and know that in doing so, you're enabling us to give the gift of growing to schools and communities across South Africa. Thank you.
It is an honor to introduce the 69th Secretary of State for the United States of America, Secretary Rex Tillerson. Throughout his public service and private sector career, Secretary Tillerson has adopted an evidence-driven approach and is a champion of efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability. These are the same characteristics that are shared by the innovators and scientists today who are involved in the grand challenges. And like a rare few, his commitment to knowledge and its application to the modern problems we face resulted in his election to the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in 2013. Secretary Tillerson embodies the integrity and determination for effective leadership to help liberate those seeking freedom from want, freedom from disease, freedom from ignorance, and freedom from tyranny around the world. As an Alaskan, I'm particularly in debt to Secretary Tillerson for his leadership on the Arctic Council this spring, when he stood stalwart to ensure that the circumpolar peoples retained an access to economic opportunity, an access to water and sanitation, and an access to mental health. All of these themes should be familiar to you because there are also themes within the Grand Challenges suite. It is a privilege to ask you to welcome the Honorable Secretary of State of the United States of America, Secretary Rex Tillerson.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Harry, for that very kind introduction. You know, the work and commitment of Bill and Melinda Gates and the Gates Foundation that they have undertaken across a range of humanitarian initiatives have had an extraordinary impact on eradicating diseases and improving health outcomes for people the world over. And I offer my thanks once again, as I have thanked them in the past, to Bill and Melinda both for this lifelong passion and commitment, much of which I have seen up close and personal, and I certainly am thankful for what they have done to help so many. I also want to recognize USAID Administrator Mark Green. Under Mark's leadership, USAID will continue to be a leader in global health and development issues And I hope that individuals and organizations in this room who share Mark Green's passion for helping people will continue to partner with USAID. As those of you who have dedicated yourselves professionally to global health and other fields of international development know, the challenges we have all committed to solve require a clear vision, a plan of action, dedicated individuals, and a constancy of purpose to complete the mission. While victory's not tomorrow, probably not next month or next year, or maybe not even the year after that, we all arise every day with the belief that one day is coming. Long-term solutions to daunting global challenges demand patience and perseverance. In our society, of course, we often want results immediately, and when we witness the human cost, having that sense of urgency is okay. It is hard for human beings to exercise patience in the first place, but it is important, I think, to measure our success and celebrate progress, even if it is incremental. An incremental approach may not be as satisfying or generate as big a headline or publicity, but if we're truly mission-driven, then we need to keep putting one foot in front of the other and without wavering from our goal, every day get up and take another step. I know that the patience and dedication in this room will pay off. The President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, better known as PEPFAR, of course, is one of the sterling examples of what I'm talking about. When PEPFAR began, the prevalence of AIDS in Africa seemed an insurmountable problem. At the time, only 50,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa were receiving HIV treatment. In many countries, an HIV diagnosis was a death sentence. In the hardest hit regions of Africa, infant mortality had doubled, child mortality had tripled, and life expectancy had dropped by 20 years. More than 14 million children had lost one or both of their parents to AIDS. Now, 14 years after PEPFAR's creation, we have not only saved millions of lives, but we're getting ever closer to ending this pandemic by supporting HIV treatment and prevention services using data and analytics to improve performance, find efficiencies, and increase the impact. President George W. Bush and other originators of the PEPFAR program took the long view to solving this challenge. The problem, they knew, wasn't going to be resolved overnight, but again, look how far we've come today. With focused investments and data-driven approach, the United States continues to reach more people. In the past 3.5 years alone, under Ambassador Deborah Birx's leadership, the number of those receiving life-saving treatments has increased by 60%. Today, more than 12 million people around the world receive treatment made possible by PEPFAR. The number of babies born HIV-free to pregnant women living with the disease has been steadily increasing too, almost twice as many in 2013. That's more than 2 million babies who now begin life free of HIV. Through PEPFAR and more than 6 million orphans and vulnerable children grappling with the physical, emotional, and economic impact of HIV and AIDS are receiving critical care to survive and succeed, including receiving educational support and counseling care. And as a result of PEPFAR's dreams, public-private partnerships, over 1 million adolescent girls and young women have been reached with comprehensive HIV prevention services to ensure they grow up and thrive without HIV. PEPFAR has empowered people around the world to take their lives and their countries back. Since its inception in 2003, PEPFAR, together with UNAIDS, the Global Fund, and many countries and partners represented here today, has transformed the global response to HIV/AIDS. The Trump administration is committed to building on the progress we have already made by accelerating our approach that focuses on the hardest hit populations. Recently, we unveiled PEPFAR's new strategy for accelerating HIV/AIDS epidemic control. This is one of our grand challenges. We believe that it is possible to control this pandemic, and in partnership with countries who share our vision, we're creating a roadmap to that control. Through this strategy, PEPFAR will invest its resources to decrease the number of new HIV infections through data-driven programming and a focus on the highest burden populations and locations. Our data is better, our data is more nuanced than ever before, allowing us to measure progress and concentrate our efforts based on sex, age, and geography. We are committed to taking full advantage of this data by using it to improve our programming and hold ourselves and our partners accountable for the results. Our strategy includes investing in more than 50 countries with several concrete goals in mind. First, we will maintain life-saving treatment for those we currently support, while making essential services like testing and treatment more accessible for all populations. In these countries, PEPFAR will continue to expand both HIV prevention and treatment services through increased performance, efficiency gains, and shared responsibilities with all of our partners. Second, the strategy will provide even more HIV services for orphans and vulnerable children, those who are immediately, permanently affected when a parent or caretaker is lost to this disease. It will also ensure that the most vulnerable and key populations have access to essential services to prevent and to treat HIV. Third, the strategy will accelerate implementation in a subset of 13 high-burden countries that have the potential to achieve epidemic control by the year 2020. Working in collaboration with host governments, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, UNAIDS, and other partners. Through this international effort, we expect not only to control the epidemic, but also to reduce the future cost required to sustain the HIV/AIDS response. PEPFAR will continue to illustrate that our effective whole-of-government approach, coupled with high accountability measures and mutual respect for our partners, can and will change the future for the better. To those engaged in these challenges, please know you have the support of the U.S. government as we work together with partner governments, the private sector, and faith-based and civil society organizations to control this pandemic once and for all. But HIV/AIDS is not the only pandemic we are committed to stopping. The President's Malaria Initiative is credited with saving millions of lives. Ambassador Green just announced the expansion of the initiative to 4 additional countries in West Africa, which will extend preventive and treatment interventions to 90 million additional persons. The Global Health Security Agenda is one of the most useful frameworks for halting the spread of infectious disease. Such outbreaks, even in the most remote parts of the world, do not respect boundaries between countries or sometimes even between species. With more than 70% of emerging diseases originating in animals and jumping to humans, integration of animal health into the broader health security effort is imperative. Containing the spread of deadly disease in the countries of origin is a vital U.S. national security interest. However, many countries remain ill-prepared to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease outbreaks within their borders, which poses a threat to all of us. The Global Health Security Agenda remains one of the most vital initiatives for building global capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease threats. Under GHSA, the United States continues to assist 31 countries and the Caribbean community to strengthen global health security, including through $1 billion in investments to strengthen global health security in 17 specific at-risk countries. These investments have yielded outstanding results. For example, with U.S. support, more than 3,700 disease detectives have investigated more than 650 outbreaks. When the Democratic Republic of Congo identified a cluster of suspected Ebola cases in May of this year, a group of U.S.-trained disease detectives deployed immediately to trace the disease and provide technical support. Their fast and coordinated action contained the potentially devastating outbreak, to only 8 cases of Ebola, only 4 deaths, and no spread outside of the DRC. GHSA has also encouraged countries to conduct a joint external evaluation, a rigorous peer review evaluation led by the World Health Organization to assess a country's health security capacities and map out a path to achieving compliance with international health regulations. To date, 56 countries have completed their JEE, with 25 additional countries in the pipeline. Our global partners have also stepped up to the plate. Australia, Canada, Japan, the Republic of Korea, the United Kingdom, and others have committed substantial resources to build health security throughout the world, and dozens of developing countries have increased domestic financing to build capacity to combat infectious diseases. While we've made tremendous progress since GHSA was launched in 2014, considerable work remains. That is why the United States advocates extending the global health security agenda until the year 2024. We must keep up the momentum to ensure that donors continue to commit resources and follow through on prior commitments, while also encouraging developing countries to make health security financing a permanent item in their budgets. Health security is a necessary foundation for countries to make strides in other areas. As President Trump told African leaders at the UN, we cannot have prosperity if we're not healthy. We must continue to empower global health security leadership, including by supporting the important efforts of the Republic of Korea, Finland, the Netherlands, Indonesia, Italy, and others, while also developing and encouraging new leaders. We also need to ensure the commitment and interest of non-governmental stakeholders, including the private sector, by making the business case for investments in health security. The global health security landscape has changed, but the United States' commitment to working in multi-sectoral partnerships to counter infectious diseases through the global health security agenda will remain constant. Our approach to development must continually evolve to meet the changing global landscape. Around the time baby boomers like Bill Gates and I were entering elementary school, governments accounted for over 70% of financial flows into the developing world. Today, that number has fallen to below 10%. The involvement of non-governmental entities in international development is commonplace today, but their emergence in this field was at one time a groundbreaking innovation in its own right. We must continue to adopt a spirit of innovation common to grand challenges in order to build on what we've already accomplished. As Isaac Newton once said, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants. Newton knew he was deeply indebted to those who had produced the knowledge that served as the foundation for his own work. That same attitude should exist among us. Innovation begets further innovation that improves old processes and moves us closer to achieving our goals. I know there's been a host of innovative products developed by Grand Challenges, whether to help end Ebola or Zika or dengue fever or other diseases. I commend all of those who have dedicated themselves to finding these new solutions. And for those of you who are still hard at the task, feeling discouraged, I encourage you to press forward. Don't give up. Thomas Edison made 1,000 unsuccessful attempts at inventing the light bulb. When a reporter asked, "How did it feel to fail 1,000 times?" Edison replied, "I didn't fail 1,000 times. The light bulb was an invention with 1,000 steps." Last but not least, I want to emphasize that generosity is at the core of who we are as Americans. The United States is the global leader in providing life-saving assistance in times of humanitarian crisis, and we will remain to take on that task. The U.S. approach to grand challenges reflects our overall approach to global development. We must view foreign aid as a means to an end, not an end unto itself. A country's prosperity and security is best sustained from within, not through foreign aid. There can be no greater measure of success than witnessing a country able to stand on its own 2 feet. Our goal for U.S. development assistance is that it will serve as a bridge to the day that recipients can rise economically and achieve sustainable prosperity for themselves. Today, many one-time recipients of foreign aid under the Marshall Plan are leading U.S. trading partners. It shows that foreign aid can create the conditions for a burgeoning middle class that makes for an inviting market for American goods and services. Even more importantly, it can put a country's own people on a path to sustainable growth and prosperity. Finally, accountability is a necessary complement to generosity. Those of us in government must ensure that the taxpayer dollars we spend are used efficiently and effectively. Accountability is essential in the nonprofit sector as well. Individuals who have contributed to philanthropic organizations are trusting you with their money. And the same need for accountability goes for the private sector as well. We must continue to be good stewards of our finite resources and work with reliable and transparent public, private, and nonprofit partners. The United States and its partners have and will continue to make smart and targeted investments that put countries on the way to success. The road to progress will be uneven, and the emergence of global development challenges will continue to present themselves. But I know that when we put our shoulder to the wheel day in and day out, as all of you in this room do, every day you get up with your mind on the mission, we remain open to innovative ideas, we embrace accountability in what we're doing, we can and we will be successful. And most importantly, we're going to do a lot of good for a lot of people. Thank all of you very much.
I want to thank Secretary Tillerson for his encouraging remarks. I think we all in the global health community know how important his strong advocacy is for PEPFAR, how important that is to millions of people living with HIV. The announcements around the expansion of PMI really impact potentially millions of particularly young kids in West Africa. So perhaps another round of applause, Secretary Tillerson. Friends of Global Health, sadly, we are coming to the end of this Grand Challenges. And usually with Grand Challenges, when there's an ending, there's also a looking to the future. So with that looking to the future in mind, I'd like to welcome Georg Schütter, the State Secretary in the Ministry of Education and Research, Germany, to join me on stage. Georg, welcome. Please. Now, you might ask the question, why did I invite the State Secretary to join me on stage? And it's because he has a surprise invitation for us, but we'll come to that in a little while. State Secretary, we've been talking with your delegation, and it's been very interesting to me how things have moved in terms of how active and engaged Germany now is in global health R&D. Perhaps you can give us a perspective on what's motivated that change and where things are headed.
And maybe I'll give you a 10-year perspective. Because 10 years ago, Germany held the G8 presidency at that time. And under the leadership of Chancellor Angela Merkel, Germany decided to invite the heads of state of quite a number of low and medium income countries to Germany to broaden the dialogue of the G8 countries to leaders from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And 8 years later, when Germany again held the G7 presidency in 2015, we introduced 2 global health issues to that agenda. AMR, antimicrobial resistance, and research on neglected and poverty-related tropical diseases. And by bringing those issues on the international agenda, we created a momentum that, in addition to many initiatives worldwide, also brought some political momentum to this. And this momentum translated on a clear action level from German involvement in product development partnerships, triggered by the Gates Foundation and actually by visits of Bill Gates to Germany. And it translated into collaboration, for example, in CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. And just recently, we joined forces for the Global Antimicrobial Resistance Development Partnership. So we engaged in bi- and multilateral activities. And when I say multilateral, I should mention the European Union Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, also something where the Gates Foundation has been involved. We met in South Africa. So there is a broad involvement now, and we try to maintain this momentum on a bilateral level and on a global level.
Well, that's engagement is fantastic to hear. So maybe if you could project for us 10, 20 years in the future, where do you see Germany might be and what the contribution to global health could be at that time?
Well, it's challenging. 10 years from now, 20 years from now. 10 years from now will be 2027. That will be 3 years prior to achieving the goals of the United Nations 2030 agenda. So we should put global health into the context of Sustainable Development Goals. When I say that, I see 2 issues at stake here. We have to look at these Sustainable Development Goals also in terms of conflicting objectives. How do we, for example, make sure that we improve food security and at the same time take care of biodiversity? But we should also look at combination of objectives, nexus issues. We heard, for example, from Ambassador Green, the nexus of migration and health, or the nexus of let's say, climate and health. So if we look at these nexus issues, we also should, on the one hand, look at innovations. How do we make sure that we can and have the right instruments to intervene in a humanitarian crisis? But we also need research to understand the root causes of these developments. And so there is a challenge for the next 10 years. If I look at 20 years from now, in 2037, and I learned that we have to be, on the one hand, ambitious, but also optimistic. Let's assume that we have and will have achieved the 2030 agenda in a positive way and have overcome the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in 2037, I would like us to discuss a global resilience agenda in order to maintain what we will have achieved. But we have to be careful. We also have to be prepared for the unknown, which we cannot foresee today.
Well, thank you very much. So I know that the folks over here are very keen to hear about your invitation.
Yes, there is an invitation. Next year, we are celebrating a birthday in Germany. The World Health Summit will celebrate its 10th anniversary. The World Health Summit in Germany brings together about 2,000 people from all over the world with a somewhat similar agenda to this meeting. It's being organized by the M8 Alliance, which used to be 8 leading institutions from all over the world engaging in medical and clinical research. Now it's a group of more than 20 partners from all over the world. And they look at the future of health research, the future of health education. They look at how we can improve healthcare systems worldwide. And if we were to complement this with the innovative agenda of this meeting, of the Grand Challenges meeting, and bring you, the innovators of today and tomorrow, together with the stakeholders from all these different fields which I just mentioned, this would be an incredible opportunity to create synergies and to move ahead with a more comprehensive research and innovation agenda. So here's the invitation. Please come to Berlin next fall and join the World Health Summit to celebrate the 10th anniversary and to propel that meeting on a different level by bringing your ingenuity to that meeting. So there is a cordial invitation to come to Germany, to come to Berlin, and start a dialogue which is so important to address the issues and the challenges of today and tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's a deal then. It's Berlin in 2018. We come to that part of the agenda where I want to thank everybody who's been involved in this meeting, and it's such a difficult task that I'm not going to really name anybody. I would once again put forward our fantastic partners, USAID, Grand Challenges Canada, and the Wellcome Trust, who make this meeting possible. But also all the people the program officers who put together the scientific tracks that I've just heard such positive things about and attended, unfortunately, just a small portion of those. People who put the tables together, the group that did the logistics for that wonderful visit on Monday night to the Museum of African American History. So how about just to that group that has made this meeting work so well, a warm round of thanks. I guess that many people know what this lapel badge is, but enough people ask me what it is that I'll just tell you. It refers to, it's the SDGs badge from the United Nations discussions that we had. And I'll bring us back to the SDGs and those important goals that are projected now into that 2030 future. I had a discussion with the funder group on Sunday, and we talked about, as funders of global health, how we are going to act in solidarity and ensure that those downside scenarios that Bill was referring to in his speech don't become a reality. And I think that there is a tremendous will within that funding group to make sure that that happens. But then there's the other side that Bill referred to, which is the upside scenarios. And then there is the beyond the upside scenarios, and that's all of you out there. That is better than what the projections show we achieve in the best case. And I have to say, after my interaction with so many people this week and seeing the quality of work that's done over here, the thoughtfulness, I'm really confident that we are there with the mind share, both north and south. Of course, there are gaps and there are things that we need to work on. But I think that that better than upside in certain key areas is achievable. So thank you all for attending. Safe travels back home. And next year in Berlin. Thank you.
That's okay. I'll do it from here.
I said I wasn't going to call out anyone, but I do want to recognize our wonderful MC Kadest for all she's done over the course of the meeting.
Well, thank you very much. So I have the most important information. It's that the closing reception is open. From here, you will go to the M level, where we all had the opening reception on Sunday night at the M level. And I thank you all for being here early in the morning and late in the evening to make this meeting work. It's been an absolute honor to be your MC, and see you all in Berlin. Thank you very much.